Hi, yes, I'm filming from a different part of the house. I'm on the stairway, and the fan is still playing in the distance. Yes, it does have its own little music, which is why the last video was so hard to hear because I had to clean up the audio and extract the fan noise. But that actually created an effect where you couldn't hear everything I was saying. So I do apologise. Here's a couple of points. So I was talking about how I completed my mental health first aid requirements. I had done all the modules with the online delivery, and then we had yesterday a full day really of training in reviewing those modules, being able to look at concrete examples, work through scenarios, and also role play. So it was really enlightening, and I got to ask different questions as well. I really like when you can be interactive, with like a Zoom call, for example, because it wasn't in person, but we will be having further in-person training. Sorry, my eyes itchy. And I'm looking forward to that as well. That will be in a little while. And so basically all this training is included in the lead up to beginning work as a peer support worker for people who have survived CSA, men in this instance. And I approached the organisation after having been in one of the women's marches last year, which was massive, the first one, organised by What Were You Wearing? And subsequently I found out about this group and went along to their first survivors and supporters session, and from there I did an 8-week series with a bunch of other survivors, and then this position came up and I applied. I got interviewed and I got the job. It's casual, so it's in addition to my academic job. But I'm really hoping to learn a hell of a lot out of this. It will be challenging, don't get me wrong. So the second thing that I covered in the quite inaudible video was having done an interview with SBS in Spanish. I'll include the link below. A lot got cut out, particularly my observations about the Queensland government and the influence of Trumpist politics, maybe, in that area. But in essence, they wanted the human angle, and so I started off talking a little bit about my story, and that was challenging. A colleague said, you come across in the recording as saying really vulnerable but strong at the same time. And it's true. It's difficult though, because as a young person, like in my early 20s, having fled situations of both domestic violence, ongoing violence, and also obviously the history of CSA, and having spoken out about it, I didn't have parental support, and I could barely broach the issue of my transsexuality. I tried to think about it in terms of sexuality, but I wasn't even really sure at that time, because CSA, the hands of an adult male, really distorts your sense of who you are. And I didn't know. I had a lot of an electric fence erected around ideas of sex and sexuality. And so I was still dealing with that when I first moved to Melbourne. And I didn't have any support. I was really poor, and I did face homelessness at different points. And just a spiral, a set of spirals, lost years, they say. Lost in translation, because I didn't talk about that in the interview, but also lost in transition because I began to see myself as being trans in my early 20s, and sought out some help and services, but I couldn't transition adequately. Definitely there was an attempt at social transition, but it's only so many years later now that I can make good on that, and with medical transition as well. So People often ask me, why did you leave it so long? And especially those that already knew this about me. And I can only say that I was dealing with so much, and I was also at risk at that time. So, in a sense, it's really fortuitous to have done this mental health first aid course, because not only does it accredit me to become a first aid provider for mental health, including if people are in crisis, but because it's part of my experience in the mental health struggles, and how they've created barriers and potential for the risks for me, and it made it really hard to transition. Not just that issue of facing the trauma of it all, getting therapy. I certainly started off therapy as a young person, but I didn't have enough money to pay for it. I was with a lesbian feminist, rad femme actually, therapist, and sometimes when I couldn't afford a session, I'd just clean her house instead of making a payment. So that was validating at the time, because we did a lot of inner child work, but I couldn't see a gender therapist. There was really no one. I did seek out some services, and I really did see myself as trans then as well. Experiencing dysphoria, which has never gone away. Of course, transition helps to deal with that. Yeah, and so it was hard to talk about some of those aspects, and I was kind of on guard, but I'm glad that I did speak about some of them as well, because I think when you're young, it's much harder in some ways, or it was then especially, but it is becoming hard for young people, especially with the actions of the Queensland government and all the Trump-inspired anti-trans stuff. So that's really what we were aiming to talk about. And I don't face discrimination for being trans these days. No, because I have a lot of privilege and resources now. I positioned myself in my life, and I developed a career. Well, now I've got another one that's emerging, but it's also with full knowledge that I'm trans and being supported, yeah? Both in terms of the knowledge from lived experience and what I have to bring to the role, and acknowledging as well that they see a person such as me as bringing something that's valuable to that context. Because actually, truth be told, a lot of LGBTQI plus individuals have this element in their trajectories, in their lives, and that does create confusion for us. That is to say that the numbers of, gay and bisexual men, also lesbian women and trans women in particular, that have experienced CSA are much higher than the general population. Not often talked about, actually, because it's potentially risking that members of the public think that there's a connection between the emergence of our sexuality or our gender identities and abuse. There's not. Instead, it is a way to throw back the blame on the person who was so victimized and use homophobia and transphobia as weapons. But those of us who survive and get support and therapy and so on, we can come out of the shadows, and effectively that's part of my story. That's really deserving of a much greater narrative arc. Anyone from Australian Story interested? I mean, I would speak out a bit more about those experiences, but it has to be in the right format, because we're not just walking biographies. We have knowledge, we have wisdom, we have talents as LGBTQI people, and especially trans people who, aren't always valued for those things. So let's see. Going forward, I'm going to make some legal changes with my documentation, but also I'm going to be launching a civil case against the person who abused me as a child. And I'm sorry for talking about this sensitive matter if this is part of your experience as well, but I won't go into any details. as survivors, we need to be able to have a voice, and we also need justice that was never obtained for me growing up. So, yeah, there's a lot of changes, good things, but ongoing kinds of processes for me. A good piece of news is that my hormone levels are really good, my health is really good, and that's really salutary, because that means that things are well balanced. Everything's in range, there's no complications. I think that things are going really well. So yeah, that was kind of feedback on a blood test that I did, which we've got to do every now and then. So anyway, wishing you all a great weekend, and hoping that you enjoy this content. If you do, and you'd like me to talk about particular topics, I'm happy to do so as well. But also hit the subscribe button down below so you can follow me. Cheers.